I think one of the connections between the tar sands and urban areas like the downtown east side is particularly that of displacement, and particularly the impacts on women. And so one of the things that we know a lot, and we talk a lot about in terms of the tar sands, is that it's a story of environmental degradation and industrial genocide, particularly on Indigenous lands and for Indigenous communities. But one of the things that we don't talk a lot about is how the tar sands is also a story of displacement and violence against women, again, particularly for Indigenous women. And so one of the impacts that we're seeing here in Vancouver in the downtown east side, which is the poorest postal code in Canada, is the ways in which from Alberta and also from BC, both provinces that are really heavily resource extractive in terms of their economies, a lot of Indigenous women in particular are being displaced into urban areas like the downtown east side. 72% of Indigenous women in BC currently live off reserve, which means that Indigenous women, as a result of resource extraction, as well as other factors, are ending up in major urban centers. And in these urban centers, like the downtown east side, we're seeing women experiencing really, really high rates of violence. The downtown east side is the epicenter of the crisis for missing and murdered Indigenous women. It also has extremely high rates of child apprehension, of police violence, of women in the prison system. And also health concerns for women. Women face a lot of violence in the drug trade and the sex trade, and the informal economies of the survival economies. This neighborhood has some of the lowest life expectancy rates, and so we know this about the downtown east side, and we know this about a lot of other major urban centers in terms of the vast inequality that exists in terms of homelessness and what we know as urban slums or urban ghettos. But what we don't talk about is what actually brings people into urban centers. And what brings people into urban centers, particularly women, is displacement from the land. And so there's a very clear connection between violence on the land and violence against women in urban areas. And there's a very clear connection between resource extraction and its impacts on the land and the forces that displace people, particularly women, into urban areas.